Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to episode 2 of my Tremors re-review series. Of course, co-hosted by good old Trevor Thomson. Make yourself known.
Howdy, everybody. I'm back.
And today, oh boy, we're talking about a very special movie. Today, we are talking about the dearly beloved Tremors 2 AfterShocks, released in 1996. Oh, Shiny Boy's here. Hello. No Godzilla vs. Kong news. I already know. Do not fly chat with Godzilla vs. Kong news. Otherwise, you're going to get whipped. Now that I got that out of the way. Yes, indeed. Tremors 2 AfterShocks. One of our favorites of the entire franchise. And one that we both, I'm assuming at least, have a shit ton of nostalgia for. So why don't you jump right into that, Trev?
Okay, I think I mentioned this in the review from yesterday, but I'll say it again. This was the first movie I saw in the franchise. It was released in 1996, and I believe DirecTV pay-per-view was kind of fairly new at the time. And I do believe my dad was watching it on there one night. And probably the best part of this movie, as we're going to elaborate on later, is what happened to be the first thing I saw as a 5-year-old kid. I saw Earl and Grady walking around the boulder and discovering the disemboweled graboid, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It was very creepy, very unsettling. I guess I kind of blacked out because I don't remember the stuff that followed, like when they first see the Shriekers. But I do remember whenever they were analyzing the one Shrieker in the cage, and I was just mystified by whatever the hell this creature was, and especially whenever it hawked up another one. And, which there's a fun fact about that I'll reveal later. That was my first exposure to anything Tremors. A little while later, I think whenever I was in 4th grade, I found the tape that had been recorded on, and I started watching it. And I watched it a whole lot for a while. Tremors 2 was the only one that I saw, but not too long after, I did start watching the first one on that crappy looking, but I guess oddly compelling Tremors on Mars copy guard tape in the first movie. Yeah, I watched that a whole bunch, and I'm going to get into it in my video that is coming out soon, plug. But
yes, plug all you want.
Yes. So yeah, Tremors 2 probably for a while was the main thing that I thought of when it came to Tremors, and just so much nostalgia. And like Nick said, I could get into it, but then whenever I start to think about it, it's like, okay, where do I start? And it's still a favorite to this day. There are some flaws with it, or nitpicks, I should say. But again, we'll get into that here in a little bit. But yeah, Tremors 2 is probably by far the most nostalgic for me, followed closely by the original movie, and then 3. But yeah, it was my first.
Similar to Trev, Tremors 2 was the very first of the franchise that I saw as well. I reiterate, I was sick and I was living with my dad at the time. I had a really bad stomach flu. And Dad was surfing through the channels on TV, and we stumbled across Tremors 2, and it was the scene when Earl and Grady encountered their first Shrieker. And I remember thinking I was going to see this giant monster that was stomping around on all these roof shingles. And then out hops this little wannabe velociraptor looking little bastard. But then I remember as soon as the Shrieker shrieked for the very first time, that scared the living shit out of me. And then I just remember blacking out after that. And then a little while later, I see Tremors 3. And that's what Dad told me, because that's how I remembered. I'll elaborate more on that when we do Tremors 3. But that always just stuck in my head. So when I became much more of a Tremors fan, I had seen the first movie. I'd seen the third movie. and I'd seen the fourth one, but I just could never get my hands on the second one for so long. Like I said, that my local Blockbuster never had part two. And the only pieces of Tremors 2 that I would watch was a 10-minute clip of a few scenes from Tremors 2 strung together. Majority of that was most of the night scenes from this movie. One of them being actually the final segment of that clip was the first encounter with the Shriekers. And that just really captivated me. And it really, really, really made me want to watch Tremors 2. I was literally starving to death for Tremors 2. That's all I wanted. I think that at that point was the only time where I ever wanted a Tremors movie more than a Godzilla movie. And that's saying something. So Netflix was relatively new at the time, and this was back when you could rent movies from Netflix and they'd send them in the mail. So I asked my mom, get me Tremors 2, please. Lo and behold, of course she did. And when it showed up in the mail, I was so excited. My hands were shaking. I was so goddamn excited. It was around the 4th of July. I plopped my ass down. I put in Tremors 2. And damn, I was not disappointed. I had a good ass time with Tremors 2. So then, finally had to give it back to Netflix. It was about a year later when Mom actually found me a copy of Tremors 2 on DVD, and she gave it to me it was either a birthday present or a Christmas. I think it was a birthday present. Yeah. And actually, for a while, Tremors 2 was the only Tremors movie that I ever owned. I would frequently rent 1, 3, and 4 from Blockbuster and have myself a Tremors marathon, but I always owned part 2. And it wasn't until I decided to get the Attack Pack when I owned the original 4 movies. But yeah, for a long time, part 2 is the only one I had. And I just always look back fondly on Tremors 2. Whenever I think of the original 4 movies, Tremors 2 is the one that immediately comes to mind and is easily the one that I have the most nostalgia for, aside from part 3, which I will elaborate on when I get to Tremors 3. But yeah, I love the shit out of Tremors 2. I would actually definitely, obviously. It's even more so one of my favorite movies than the first Tremors. And obviously at one point, this was my favorite of the entire franchise, but then part 5 came out. And as you've seen in our ranking video, part 2 is number 2 for both of our lists. 2, 2, and 2. That's all I have to say. Anything else to add, Trev?
Nope, let's get into the nitty gritty.
Okay. This plot synopsis might be a bit shorter because Tremors 2 kind of has a bit of a more simple plot, but I could be wrong. I do know that apparently this one had a much lower budget than apparently it had a $4 million budget. Damn. Really?
They spent it well.
No kidding. Okay. Years after the events of the first film, wait, has there ever been any reason why Kevin Bacon didn't return? Or are you going to get into that when we get to the behind the scenes stuff when the plot synopsis is over?
Yeah, I'll get into it a little bit. I'm trying to pull up the Stampede Entertainment forum where they go into it, but my video is kind of hogging the space.
Years after the events of the first film, Val McGee has moved away and married Rhonda LeBeck, while Earl Bassett has squandered his fortune on a failing ostrich ranch. He is approached by Carlos Ortega, who is I don't really know what he is, but he's some kind of big bureaucrat dude for a Mexican oil field. He informs Earl that graboids are killing his workers at an oil field in Chiapas, Mexico. Or, pardon if I butcher that. I'm not super good at Latino words. And hires him.
Was fine.
Huh?
No, that was fine. You said it right.
Chiapas?
Mm-hmm.
And he hires Earl to hunt them down. Earl initially declines, but Ortega's taxi driver, Grady Hoover, played by Christopher Garden, and also, of course, Earl, once again being played by Fred Ward. Grady convinces Earl to change his mind, and both join the hunt. Upon arrival, Earl learns that the company is willing to pay him double if he is to catch one of the graboids alive, which obviously Earl is not happy about. He also meets geologist Kate Riley, played by Helen Shaver, her assistant Julio, and a mechanic named Pedro, all of whom are scientifically investigating the graboids. Earl and Grady begin systematically killing the graboids off by using remote-controlled cars rigged with explosives. Though their strategy seems to work, the vast number of graboids, there being 28 in this film, overwhelms them, and Earl enlists the help of returning Michael Gross as Burt Gummer, who arrives with a truck loaded with firearms and explosives, kind of grizzled after separating from his wife because Reba McEntire, I guess, didn't want to come back. The next day, Earl and Grady encounter what appears to be a sick, non-aggressive graboid that surprises them, causing Earl to drive backwards haphazardly, which results in him crashing their truck. After calling Pedro to come pick them up with the graboid, it begins making horrific sounds, and that night it is actually found dead, seemingly violently ripped open from the inside out. Again, what's with all the xenomorph comparisons? They see Pedro's truck approach from the distance, however it suddenly stops in its tracks, prompting Grady and Earl to investigate and discover Pedro's remains, the bloody stumps of his arms, alongside the truck's completely destroyed engine. Looks like somebody took a can opener to the thing. They make their way to a nearby radio broadcasting building, which has similarly been torn to pieces, only to be met by a strange bipedal graboid-like creature. Earl successfully kills one as it charges him, but the two flee in a car they had found as more of the creatures arrive. This, of course, being the very first appearance of the Shriekers. Meanwhile, Bert's truck is ambushed by a pack of Shriekers while returning to base after losing a graboid into a set of hills. The following morning, the Shriekers have made their way to the oil refinery where Julio is violently killed by a Shrieker. Grady and Earl arrive before it can attack Kate, with Bert shortly arriving thereafter following a near-fatal firefight that has left him drained of all ammunition. Through experimentation, the group discovers that these creatures, of course being Shriekers, are hermaphroditic that can replicate at an incredible rate after eating enough food, i.e., to quote the film, they reproduce without having sex. To which case a quote from the 1998 Godzilla movie comes to mind. Where's the fun in that? They also learned that the Shriekers cannot hear, unlike their predecessors, but rather see heat through special infrared receptors on their heads. However, they are attacked by Shriekers who have discovered Bert's MRE food supply and have rapidly doubled their numbers in a matter of minutes. They run for Julio's car, but Bert accidentally disables it while killing a Shrieker with his Grizzly single-shot 50 caliber BMG. Hiding from the Shriekers, Bert is trapped in a bulldozer bucket, while Grady, Kate, and Earl are on top of an oil tower. The Shriekers work together in an attempt to climb the tower before Bert traps them in the storage shed with the truck. However, they discover rice flour is stored inside the well as some kind of sweet snack food. enabling the Shriekers to continue eating and multiplying inside the storage unit. Earl douses himself in CO2 from a fire extinguisher to hide his body heat, which I'm pretty sure that's kind of impossible because I think he would suffocate with all that stuff smoking around his face, but whatever.
Yeah.
And tries to find Bert's explosives amongst the Shriekers who have multiplied into dozens of Shriekers. While the plan works, the CO2 quickly melts off, and the Shriekers detect his body heat, forcing Earl to throw a detonator among Bert's supplies before escaping, i.e. a truck filled with 2.5 tons of high explosives. The group manages to escape before a massive explosion decimates the entire facility, destroying all the Shriekers with it. In the aftermath, Kate and Earl decide to pursue each other romantically in a way that's not forced, unlike the last movie, while Grady suggests opening a monster-themed theme park due to the money Ortega now owes them, thus ending the film on a happy note. Trev?
Okay, so great plot, especially with what it turned into. Initially, S.S. Wilson, the director and also writer for all four of the Stampede Entertainment movies, he initially wanted to go to Australia, and Val and Earl would have came back, as would have Bert and Heather. But Kevin Bacon at the time thought he was too good for doing another Tremors. Reba McEntire, I do believe, didn't want to be typecast, if I'm remembering correctly, so she declined as well.
I think her music career was taken off at the time, too.
That's true. So she had to kind of figure out where her priorities lied. So yeah, Fred Ward was on board. Michael Gross was as well. But Australia ended up being considered too expensive by Universal. So eventually what started happening was that the crew and everybody, Amalgamated Dynamics, Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis, they were back. And also various other crew members. They really wanted to make this movie, so they agreed to cut the costs wherever they could, whether it be like their wages that they would earn, or whatever budget they wanted to spend on the movie, which is how it eventually ended up getting down to $4 million, and that also factored into why the location was changed to Mexico, because that's apparently more affordable than filming in Australia. So yeah, all these downsizing factors from what was originally intended all occurred mainly because they really wanted to make the movie and they were willing to adapt any way they could. And eventually, it ended up being direct to video again because there was a reason it wasn't deemed a theatrical. Not effort, but it wasn't. I guess Universal didn't see it as something they could distribute theatrically.
Which I think is kind of a load of shit, because this definitely does, at least to me, it looks like a theatrical film. I mean, if 7 years later they would give Phantasm 2 only a $3 million budget and consider that to be a theatrical film, why not Tremors 2, which had a $4 million budget and looks way more professional than Phantasm 2?
Indeed. And it almost was theatrical, but again, some last-minute decisions.
No, it was 8 years. Excuse me. Phantasm 2 came out in 1988, not 89.
Yes, correct. So yeah, there was some major decisions that eventually, as we know, decide the fate of the series as a direct-to-video franchise, which
for the better.
Isn't necessarily a bad. Yeah, for the better, because that's not a bad thing. Because as I'll mention again, this has quite a legacy to it in terms of quality. So, yeah.
Well, my initial thoughts. This is how you do a sequel. As I've said many times, there's 3 ways that you can do a sequel. A lot of people try to go for the third one, but they don't do it very often. So they end up just revolving into 2. One, it's just a carbon copy of the first film. Like Jaws 2. which I like Jaws 2, but you can't deny, definitely does have sequelitis in the fact that it's very much a carbon copy of the first Jaws film. Another one is Phantasm 2. There's a lot of elements of Phantasm 2 that are just repeats of the first Phantasm. Ironically, both being Universal films. Or you go the other direction where you make a sequel and it's so different from its predecessor that it's unrecognizable, like Beneath the Planet of the Apes. But then there's the third one where you get it just right. It's a great continuation of its predecessor's story. It brings back elements from the first film, but not in a way that it feels like a rehash. It's just more so carryovers from its previous installment, but it expands upon that even more so. Probably the greatest example of all time is Empire Strikes Back. I don't like Empire Strikes Back personally, but objectively, Empire Strikes Back is easily one of the greatest sequels of all time. It's a great continuation of its predecessor's story and universe, expands on its mythology much more, and introduces new ideas that feel right at home in its own mythology. Same case goes for Tremors 2. It brings back elements from its predecessor. It continues elements from its predecessor, but expands upon them further, makes them more interesting, and adds more meat and potatoes to its own mythology. Another example, too, which is also 20th Century Fox, is Aliens. You have only the one xenomorph in the first Alien movie. So then Aliens takes the concept of what if there's more than one? Similar with Tremors 2. There's 4 graboids. What happens if there's 28? And also, what happens if the graboids can walk on land? I would definitely say that Tremors 2 is easily one of the greatest sequels of all time. Big words, I know, because there's so many other sequels out there that are technically and objectively better, but just personally, whenever I think of really, really good, especially number 2 sequels, Tremors 2 is easily in my top 5, along with Aliens, Terminator 2, and Blade 2.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So yeah, that's all I have to say. Trev?
Shall we get into our pros?
Yes. Once again, I have 11 pros.
I have 8, but I also have 2 cons, more nitpicks, but I'm going to mention them as cons. Okay, so my number 1 pro is once again the monsters. One could argue that the Shriekers are starting to move away from the originality of the graboids. I've seen some people say that. I don't necessarily agree.
No.
And obviously, Nick.
The only way that I could kind of say that they're not, someone could say they're not original, is that they're very similar to Velociraptors, because Jurassic Park had just come out 3 years prior. I can kind of see that, but I don't think that's what they were going for.
Yeah, and the Shriekers are very dinosaurian, either that or graboid chickens. That's my dad used to call them Tremor chickens, which I thought was funny. Yeah, so the Shriekers are great. I think that they are a logical evolution from the graboids. They're smaller, but their main purpose seems to be to increase the population.
Yes.
And that will factor into the next stage of their life cycle, which is the penultimate stage. But yeah, they make sense. In some ways, they're more threatening than graboids in some situations. S.S. Wilson said that graboids probably wouldn't or even approach large metropolitan areas because of all the noise. It would basically drive them insane, probably kill them from the overstimulation. But Shriekers, they don't have to worry about sound because they're deaf.
And technically also blind.
Yes, although they have some variation of sight with their heat sensing.
Yes.
But anyway, I did mention this in the ranking video, and I'll mention it again. Wilson suggested that, say, if some Shriekers got into the sewer of some city and started eating the rats, that would be a major problem because then they would start to overrun the sewer and then probably the city. So, yeah, in a populous situation, since the Shriekers, whenever they eat, that increases their population, they would be more of a threat to that. Whereas graboids are something that you would definitely be screwed with if you were out in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
So yeah, once again, the monsters are great. The Shriekers' sound is very iconic and to me very unique. I don't think this sound had ever been used before.
Nope.
And sadly, I wish it had been used in Shrieker Island, but I digress. So yeah,
it's probably a conscious decision on Universal's part to not use the original Shrieker sound effect.
Probably. That's probably the best bet. So yes, like with the original Tremors, the monsters are by far the best and most unique thing about it. Pro number 2 is the cast. We have 2 carryovers from the original movie. Two that were very good from the original movie, might I add. Fred Ward as Earl, who's rocking some mullet action in this.
Even though it was the 90s at this point, he's way out of touch.
Indeed. And of course, Michael Gross has come back as Bert. I guess this is the point where I'll mention, since we've been making Jaws comparisons, I suppose if you wanted to compare Tremors 2 to Jaws 2, Earl, I guess, is kind of like Chief Brody.
Yeah.
Being a favorable character. He wasn't exactly the main character in the original movie. I would compare Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss, to Val.
Yes.
Being the star who didn't want to come back. And while there is comparisons for Bert and Quint, of course, Quint met his demise in the original Jaws, and Bert kept on ticking for a while. But I do think those characters are analogous, I guess the word, comparable.
Yep.
But yeah, the cast is actually pretty small in this movie too. So
yeah, very actually. And it wasn't that big to begin with in the first Tremors, but it's at least a third smaller in Tremors 2.
That's true, and it also allows, I mentioned this to Nick in chat, and I'll mention it here. It seems like S.S. Wilson is more interested in letting people just talk and get to know each other. Because there's the third act of this movie. Wouldn't that be it, Nick, the third act? Basically, they're pinned back up on the roofs of their settlement, their surroundings. And unlike the first movie, which was go, 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 we have to get out of here, here they just kind of hang around until they figure something out, and we get to know more about Kate. Turns out she, even though this isn't what actually happened, turns out she is the Playboy playmate that Earl has pinned up in his trailer, which he says reminds him of things he's never going to get. Helen Shaver was not Miss October 1974, but it's still a funny thought. Speaking of Helen Shaver as Dr. Kate White, apparently. I don't think they... what's his name? The head of the company. He introduced her like that, but it always kind of struck me, Kate White, whenever I watched the cast list at the end. Kate, I think, is probably my favorite female character out of the original 4 movies. Helen Shaver does a good job. I don't think...
probably mine too. Yeah, she's not annoying. She's not dumb. She's not too full of herself. She's just a very down-to-earth, very helpful, and very intelligent scientist character. Yeah.
True, and also... Go ahead.
That's all I had to say. Go ahead.
True, and also she does get scared, but frankly, it is a very understandable reason for being scared, because it's actually basically the finale of what is probably the creepiest and scariest moment of the whole movie, where nobody knows what's going on, and her fear is understandable because really everybody's just kind of scrambling to figure out what's going on.
And also, she
So,
witnesses one of her friends get torn to pieces by a monster.
yes, exactly. And even the fodder, I guess you'd say. Well, Pedro doesn't really make an impact aside from the fact that he's the guy who speaks Spanish, and he's kind of like Lars from the Thing prequel.
Not nearly as likable,
Although,
though.
well, yeah, and he also doesn't get any focus. And Julio, he's fine. He seems to be a bit of a fanboy, although he's under the impression that Earl must be rich because he invested in the video game, which we know he didn't invested in the video game. Instead, he invested in an ostrich farm, which this reminds me. Yesterday Nick said that whenever Earl said "pardon my French" in the original movie, as a kid he thought that meant that the French had a lot of cuss words in their language. I had a similar misunderstanding with something Earl said with this movie. I thought that Val and Earl had parted on sour terms because whenever he says, I blew it on goddamn Big Bird and his scrawny girlfriends, for some reason I was thinking that was Val.
But I did too, for a little bit.
Yeah, in later years, well, because I was thinking when he said scrawny girlfriends, I was thinking of Tammy Lynn Baxter, all the dead weight girls. Oh, broken nail.
Makes my skin crawl.
That's what I was thinking, but of course, as I got older, I realized, he's bitter because he decided to invest what he earned from his fame in this ostrich farm, and it's not producing any results. So that's why he's all pissed off. That occurred to me in recent years. So anyways, there is some cannon fodder, I guess you say here, but they're not like unlikable.
No, not at all.
It doesn't have a Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom syndrome where the people who get killed are all schmucks.
To say the least.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a tight cast. Everybody who ends up surviving is likable. For one thing, it's the two veterans. Oh, I almost forgot to mention Grady. Grady is definitely the fanboy cliche, but he's not super annoying.
No, not at all. He's a tiny bit at first in the very beginning, especially when he comes in dragging that giant ass chain with all them damn cans on it. But he, once they get into the groove of killing off graboids, you're just like, okay, he's just very, very little overly enthusiastic, but he's trying to help.
Well, yeah, and they also repeat that trope. Well, Grady's kind of the first example of this in the franchise, but we kind of get that with Travis later on. Jimmy in Shrieker Island is another example of that. It's also, I think I'll save this for Tremors 3, but there are some Kevin Bacon analogs down the road that come along. Actually, this is my pro number 2 and 3 because I've been talking about the cast and the characters. Definitely. They're enjoyable. I don't get bored whenever it's just them hanging out, getting to know each other, and whenever they're in the thick of it, you care about what's going to happen to them, which is always the sign of a good character and a good cast.
And I did the math. Both Grady and Earl were set to receive just under $1.5 million after killing off all of those graboids. And if they decided to charge them for all the Shriekers as well, could have been at least $2 or $3 million a piece.
Mm-hmm.
Which may not sound like a whole lot, but that was back in 1996, so $1 million was still a bit of a chunk of change.
Indeed.
Well, I mean,
okay.
If I had $1 million, to quote my dad, shit, if I had, hey dad, how would you react if you had $10 million? I'd be a very happy man.
I think most people would. So continuing right along, because that was my first 3 pros. Pro number 4 is the effects. There are some minor quibbles because this was mid-90s, so CGI was becoming more
mainstream.
More common. And this was also Tippett's studio. Phil Tippett initially started out as a stop motion animator.
Yep.
He did the go motion variation, and he did a very good job. But right as he was coming into that update of the stop motion technique, CGI blew up, and he ended up being one of the effects artists for Jurassic Park, and he was part of the revolution.
Well, okay, yeah. At first they were gonna do stop motion for the dinosaurs, but then Phil Tippett quickly realized, nah, for a movie this high caliber, stop motion just looks a little too archaic. So he did end up becoming like a technical consultant for the CGI work, I believe.
That's true. He was a consultant. But anyway, he was basically, after that experience, he realized that he needed to adapt, and so he founded his own studio. And
is he dead?
What was that?
Is he dead?
Oh no, he's still alive. He looks old as hell, but he's he's still alive. In fact, there's a YouTube channel with that tours his studio and whatnot. But yeah, anyway, in '96,
looks like George R.R. Martin.
He looks like Doo-Doo-Wah? Is that what you're saying?
He looks like George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, he does a little bit, without glasses, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, '96 was a busy year for Phil Tippett. He was working on this, the CG work for this, but more notably, he did Draco from Dragonheart, who used to look super impressive, but now he's rather cartoony. Still a good movie.
Great movie. But, also Universal.
Yes, oh, yes, for sure. So, yeah, the CGI Shriekers overall in this movie are okay. There's only one shot that bothers me, and it's whenever the Shrieker has its tongue stabbed by Kate whenever they're trying to get to the bar.
That's probably the worst, because it looks super, super fake, and it looks so...
Yeah.
It looks like melted latex.
Yeah, it falls over, and what is bad about it is that whenever it snaps at the other Shrieker next to it, the sacs on their neck, it kind of just disappears into the mouth a little bit. It's one of those little glitches. But the other stuff doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's CGI that you'd expect on this budget, I suppose you'd say, and also from this time period.
They don't linger on the CGI shots as well. That's what because like once again, I feel like the filmmakers were smart and they knew that the CG didn't look super great, so they only used it very sparingly and only when they had to.
Indeed, which is also something that they did with Jurassic Park. It was a mentality there for a little while until Hollywood got too confident and just started overlaying everything with CG, because that's what they thought everybody wanted. But I digress. But the practical effects, once again done by Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis, Amalgamated Dynamics, they came back and they did a fantastic job. All the practical Shriekers in this movie feel real.
Excuse me.
And they feel real, and they again, there's logic in the evolution of the design. And yeah, so I will mention part of the constraints that their reduced budget that they agreed to entailed was that the miniature Shrieker, or we're supposed to think it's a miniature Shrieker, is actually one of the full-scale puppets, but they built a cage to scale with it, and it's not a miniature; it's an actual full-scale Shrieker made or photographed to appear like it's a miniature Shrieker.
Huh.
So that's a neat little tidbit, and because they didn't have the money to, they had like a certain number of props for like each, like hand puppets or hero Shriekers, which are like their animatronics. They call them hero Shriekers because that's like the main ones they use, I do believe. So yeah, the effects definitely a highlight, especially in light of the budget and how it turned out. They used the budget very well, which the first movie did too, but this was even more impressive because it was so reduced.
The only thing that's a little disappointing is that you never see the animatronic Shriekers walk. I feel like now that Trev brought it to light, it's because of the limitation of the budget and the effects. But still, it's a little disappointing that you never see the animatronic Shriekers walk. You just see them stand there. They move their heads and they move their mouths and their tails, but they never walk.
K&B did make an effort in Tremors the series, particularly in Night of the Shriekers, whenever we see the feet of one as it's from underneath the van before it comes around the corner. Although, again, we don't see the animatronic really in full walking. But still, that was kind of a progression with the animatronic.
Also, as well in Night of the Shriekers, you see one of the mercenaries leading one of the Shriekers with a heat wand, but you don't see its feet moving. It's just like from the knee up when you see the thing move, and you never see its legs move.
Indeed. So yes, effects are great, especially in light of the circumstances. Pro number 5 is this is the last time Tremors was properly scary. The best part of the whole movie, really, the whole thing is good, but the best part of the movie is this. Really, actually, it starts whenever Earl and Grady realize that there's something wrong with the graboid that's moving away from them instead of coming towards them, and that is the beginning of the end. Well, not like super dramatically, but it's the beginning of things starting, the tide starting to turn, which makes sense given all the graboids that have been killed. You would think that either they're doing this because it's like a seasonal thing, or they're doing it in response to the fact that so many of them are being killed. But anyways, yes.
Yeah, that is a question I just now realized. Why all of a sudden now are they morphing into Shriekers?
Well, it makes me think that maybe it's a coincidence that the season is whenever it just so happens to be the season when they do it. If that's
I think it's just a coincidence because presumably in the first Tremors, the graboids weren't alive for all that long. So maybe they just didn't reach that point in time where it was time for them to metamorphose. In part 2, I get the sense the graboids had been there for a little while. So
True, and also go ahead.
So they eventually, it just became their time to morph into Shriekers.
Well, and jumping ahead a little bit to Tremors 3, Bert does note that one reason why they keep on being surprised by the life cycle is the fact that they're never alive long enough for them to see what happens if they are alive that long. So, yeah, again, this the whole nighttime section of this movie, and Nick will definitely get into this as well, so yes. I'm not going to go on too long. I did mention that as a Texan, I have been out in the country at night in the middle of nowhere. It's a very disconcerting feeling sometimes, and if you put me in this situation where there were a bunch of giant worms that were doing something I couldn't explain, I can definitely very easily imagine what that situation is like. And it's just a fine. I either said this in the ranking or to Nick at some point off camera. I think S.S. Wilson, his strength, aside from letting people talk and be charming, is the
master of nighttime suspense.
Nighttime suspense, yes. This is the best example of it, but Tremors 4 does a pretty good job of it too. It's just the sense of, in that case, it's a group of people being holed in with no way out, seemingly. And in this case, it's people who are isolated, which is really just a theme of Tremors in general. It's people who are isolated in a situation that is quite frightening. See, that's all I'll say about it, because I think Nick will get into it for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But that is my pro number 5. Okay, so 3 more left. Pro number 6 is the music. Again, nothing super like iconic. Well, I don't say iconic. Nothing that's like award or Oscar worthy or what you would quote unquote consider that kind of stuff. But it is still memorable. It still serves the movie well. Very catchy Mexican flavored main theme.
Yes.
Actually, 2 of them. There's one in the opening credits, which also plays at the end. There's the theme that plays whenever Earl and Grady are driving down to Mexico, which is also has that's a combo of kind of like like a badass march thing going on whenever they're first driving, and then it turns into the Mexican flavor thing once they cross the border.
Which sounds very much like stereotypical mariachi music.
Yes, indeed, but it is very catchy. And also, to highlight the last pro, or to work in tandem with it, the music during the nighttime scene.
Oh my god!
Is very creepy. And also, I should mention, also a great thing about the fear factor in this movie is that there's a line that Earl says, "This brings back memories," which recalls all the great creepy moments from the first movie. So again, they work together very well in that regard. And back to the music, like I was saying, it fits the movie very well and enhances the experience, which is what music should do for movies.
Yes.
Okay, so pro number 7 is the humor. Again, and this factors into quotes and whatnot. Here I am talking, and I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but we've already said some quotes that highlight the humor.
Man, this stuff really stinks. Yeah, don't forget to get that antenna, too. It's just slathered in shit and guts and stink.
Well, son, no, it isn't. Well, son, no, it isn't, because we just caught ourselves a live one. A live one? How in the hell? Well, that's just a happy hunting secret, Bert.
No, it goes, well, that's just a little trade secret. Happy hunting, Bert.
There we go. I bet that Bert is skinny ass. And then the fun ends, and we hear the horrifying graboid. That also reminds me, I think the one really good graboid effect in the movie is the one shot, and I believe it's a miniature, where it's crawling out of the ground.
Yeah, it's beaching itself.
Yeah. All the while making that horrible sound.
Yeah.
So yeah, Nick's probably going to bring up some other examples, but again, like the first movie, and maybe this is where things started to shift more towards the humor and less horror or suspense and whatnot. But I still
I think that was in 3. I think this one is more scary than it is funny.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, but I've seen some people say that maybe this is where it started to creep in there a little bit. But again, humor fits, and I'll let Nick elaborate on that, I'm sure. And my final pro, number 8, again, the one thing I thought of was the legacy. In this case, Tremors got the ball rolling on a very unique franchise, but this movie cemented what it would continue to be. And it's also considered at the time, and I think still, one of the best direct-to-video sequels or movies ever made. Actually, it was very impressive to various critics at the time, and I think that's an impressive legacy for a second entry in a cult movie franchise.
Yep, especially considering that its budget was more than cut in half.
Indeed.
All right, so
it's your turn.
As I said, I have 11 pros, though I will admit it probably will be closer to 9 because a lot of these pros can be wrapped up into one, but I will talk about them as I go along. But pro number 1 is the cast and characters. Like Trev said, we have 2 returning, Earl and Mike. Earl and Bert, played by Fred and Mike. They feel exactly like how they did in the first movie. Earl is just the kind of grizzled old wise guy, and Bert is still the paramilitary paranoid. And it's great. This is definitely, though, when this is the very first appearance of classic Bert that we see. Now, it reaches its peak, and it's brought to full front and center in Tremors 3, but there's a lot of groundwork that's laid for his character in Tremors 2 that we see in parts 3 and in the series. It's just brought to a much bigger exaggeration in 4, 5, and 6. Or in 6, 7, and especially 5. And the rest of the cast, Christopher Garden, he does a great job as Grady. At first, he's a little annoying, but then he kind of grows on you, and he just becomes the helpful sidekick. And Helen Shaver does a very, very good job as Kate. She's very intelligent. She does get scared a couple times, but she's able to pull herself together and try to fight her way through the situation, which is good. She doesn't become a damsel in distress, thank God.
Can I say one other thing about Helen? She broke my heart as Littlefoot's mom in Land Before Time. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
That was her?
That was her indeed. I just blew his mind again, everybody.
What the fuck? Okay,
it's messed up. And two very important franchises to me also. Well, I like the first Land Before Time anyway.
Also another Universal franchise.
Yes. I'm thinking these people have contracts.
Possibly. Anyway, so that aside, not going to get into my dislike of the original Land Before Time, but all right.
Well, that's fine. It's better not to talk about it because it messes me up.
Yeah, she does a good job, and the rest of the cast, I'll get into my nitpicks regarding the cast, but what we do have, they're just fine. Not that much to say. I feel like just the main focus is Bert, Earl, and Grady, with Kate being just kind of there, but she's still a good character. Pro number 2 is the setting, and 3 is the cinematography. Returning from the first film, the setting, once again, it's different, but it's still very similar. It's still out in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, but instead of being in a desert, it's just in a desert grassland, as I like to call it. And the cinematography, once again, is very, very beautiful. I do like to look at pure blue skies with bright green grass and just not super hot sun blaring down on the whole area. It does look very pretty, and it does look very appealing to be in. And the cinematography, once again, shows off the beautiful landscape. It's very open. It looks very free. It just looks fun to be in. It also shows off a lot of the more mountainous terrain of this grassy Mexican landscape. Whoever did the cinematography did a great job. I think in some ways it's a bit more pretty to look at than it is in the first film. Pro number 4 is the whole montage scene with Earl and Grady killing off all the graboids. The song that they chose is so fucking catchy, and just watching all these graboids get blown to pieces with dirt and rocks and orange blood just splattering into the air as you just hit that button, boom, hit that button, boom, boom, boom. It's so fucking fun, and it gets my blood pumping every time I see that scene. It's just so fucking fun. It's also nice to see because this whole time Earl is just kind of bitching and moaning about how horrible this job is, but even he starts to get caught up in the fun of it, so he just starts going, yeah. So yeah, it's fun. Pro number 5 is the music. again, like with what Trev said, the music is nothing super noteworthy, but it's very, very good. Let's see, who did the music?
Jay Ferguson. He also did Tremors 4.
Oh, okay, then he must like to work with the S.S. Wilson.
Yes.
The music has a very Latino feel to it. There's a lot of Latino music cues. They use that, like, what's it? Bleh. Like I said earlier, it has a very mariachi feel to it. Like it feels like there's a lot of mariachi instruments that are used. Yep, Jay Ferguson. What else has he done? Oh, okay. Yeah, it just sounds like mariachi music. But there also is a lot of really good music that's used, like classic rock or southern rock music that's used throughout the film, like the song that's used for that graboid blow up montage, and all the military music that they use for Bert, like when he first drives up in his big giant truck, and when he's driving back to the base after killing off all the Shriekers. It's good stuff. And also the music that's used during all the nighttime scenes is really, really, really good. So this will lead me into, let's see, hang on one. Pro 6, 7, 8, and 9 all mostly have to do with the night scenes. And 9 itself, I wrote down as the night scenes. So this movie has great suspense, great atmosphere, a great creep factor, and the night scenes in this movie are so fucking good. The suspense is very, very nail biting. It's one of those great situations in a horror film where, especially in a horror sequel, where you think everything is just going along normally, and then something happens that completely changes the rules, and you're reeling back and you're just wondering, whoa, what the fuck's going on? And that starts when you hear the first howl of pain from the first graboid. The atmosphere also is very, very heavy and tense. You feel like you're being watched, you feel helpless, you feel isolated, and you feel very, very antsy and just edge of your seat, ants in your pants. You're wondering, whoa, the rules have changed. What the fuck's going on? What the fuck do we do? How do we get out of this situation?
Whole new ball game. Whole new goddamn ball game.
Yep, totally a new ball game. Yeah, the atmosphere is very, very tense, especially when Earl and Grady come across Pedro's truck torn to pieces. The music is so eerie and it's so creepy. And actually, just thinking about it now, I kind of get shivers up my spine just thinking about it. When they slowly walk up to it and they just see that it's totally mangled. The engine's torn out. It's still smoking. There's wires and strips of metal all over the place. It literally looks like someone took a can opener to the thing. And the music that plays when they discover Pedro's arm stumps, it's very unnerving and it gets under your skin. And it's a great way of accentuating what's happening on screen and making you think, oh, fuck. And the music that plays when we come across the first Shrieker, like the build-up, I feel like this may have been slightly humorous, where the big build-up music, when you hear it sounds like a big, giant, 30-foot-tall monster is stomping on these roof shingles. And then, like I said, this wannabe velociraptor little motherfucker hops out, and Grady's just like, what the hell is that?
It's there for sure. I think that is a little bit humorous.
And once again, he accentuates by saying, how does a 30-foot worm turn into that little thing? And then the music that plays when the Shrieker turns its head around and raises up its heat sensor. And the look on Earl's face is priceless. It's like the way I can best describe it is, uh-oh. Don't know what this is, but it don't look good.
Sure,
and then of course,
damn ostrich.
Huh?
Sure ain't no damn ostrich.
Nope, not at all. Which, for the record, ostrich can be assholes.
Oh yeah, all those big flightless birds.
I don't know which one's more of a dick, ostrich or emu.
Seems like they're competing sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh wait, who's competing? I thought it was a tie.
Well, son, no it isn't, because we just caught ourselves a live one. How about that?
A live one? How in the...
Well, that's just a little trading secret. Happy hunting, Bart. Anyway, you know, it's such a shame. The night scenes in this movie are so good. I can't help but feel like the rest of the movie kind of goes downhill just a little bit. But then the study scenes of the captured Shrieker make up for that, because it's good engrossing stuff, and it's a great exploration on the Graboid mythos, which I'll get back to that in just a little bit. But my favorite scene in the whole movie is when when Earl and Grady come across the first dead Graboid. That music is so creepy. It's like a great revelation music cue. How the camera, it looks like the Graboid is just kind of like asleep or unconscious, and it slowly pans around, and you see a big cavernous hole in the motherfucker, and you're like, oh God, what the fuck? Overall, the night scenes, the suspense, the atmosphere, and the creep factor, it's so good. It's so goddamn good. It's easily the best stretch of the whole movie, and is debatably one of the best stretches of any of the Tremors films in the entire franchise.
And again, my first exposure to Tremors too, so a great introduction.
Mine as well, so yeah, I have to agree.
Hey, what's your burp fuel tonight, or this afternoon?
Diet Shasta Cola, a 2.5 liter bottle from the dollar store, which I didn't know they sold.
Good Lord.
So, pro number 10 is the Shriekers. Love them. I've said before, the Shriekers are my favorite form of the Graboids. I find them to be the scariest. Find them to be the most threatening, because like Trev said, if they were to get into a sewer system, or if they were to get to a major metropolitan area, it would be a fucking nightmare. You would damn near just maybe not nuke the town, but definitely take a couple Moabs to it, mother of all bombs, and just level the entire city or town, because it would just be a nightmare. I love the Shriekers. They're creepy, they're scary, they're threatening. The sound that they make, at times it gets slightly annoying. That's my mom talking through me, because she hates listening to the Shriekers, but the sound they make is very unique and is kind of freaky. I also like how each form of the Graboids, to jump ahead to the ass blasters for just a moment, the Graboids are kind of like great white sharks. The ass blasters are kind of like big birds of prey. Shriekers are like wolves. They're pack hunters. And that's part of what makes them so scary. Though I still think a Shrieker on its own is scary enough as well. And also the way that they are born. I want to talk about this for just a minute. I like how the filmmakers really tried to draw inspiration from real life animals to bring their creatures to life, so to speak. And it's also weird that I can't really think of a way to classify Graboids and Shriekers. Like, part of me wants to think they're kind of reptilian, but they're not, because reptiles are cold-blooded. Part of me wants to think they're like mammals, but I don't really think they fall into that either. The closest you could kind of say is that they're like bugs, But even then, they're not 100% like insects. They're kind of like a weird amalgamation of both reptilian, mammals, and insects. Insects, of course, like I said, being the closest, and how the Shriekers are born is actually based off of real life bugs. I can give you two examples. But more specifically, there's a species of wasp that captures caterpillars, and it stings them, and its venom paralyzes the caterpillar, and it lays its eggs inside the caterpillar. So inside their bodies, the eggs gestate, and once they're born, the baby wasps chew and eat their way out of the caterpillar so they can have some food for them to snack on when they're first born. And they literally tear their way out of the caterpillar and fly off. This is exactly the case with Shriekers as well. They gestate inside the graboid, inside these like little sacs, and when it's time for them to be born, they literally just tear their way throughout the graboid's body, which is nasty and gross to think about, and it sounds painful too. And that's another little thing. We never see that happen in real time. We always just see the aftermath. I want to see the process of Shriekers being born, because I always wondered, are they fully grown when they tear their way out, or are they like little babies?
Well, the bags did look full size.
True, yeah. It's also kind of inconsistent about how many Shriekers are born. In Tremors 3, they say there's 6. In Tremors 2, they say there's 3, which I think that would be the most likely scenario, because there was 3 big sacks inside the thing, so I would imagine only one would be inside each of them. But then there's one in Tremors the series that gave birth to only 4. But we didn't hear the whole story with that one, so maybe there was 2 that were killed beforehand, before the 4 were captured. And then I don't quite remember how many were born in Tremor 7.
Well, okay, I think just like number 2, there were 3, they looked like holes. They didn't show the sacks, but they had holes. There were 3 holes in the partially submerged graboid. So there were 3 that came out first, and then as, of course, they started eating, their number increased.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, the Shriekers are fucking scary. They're threatening. They're mean. They're nasty little bastards. And I love them. I will say, though, that this is not quite my favorite appearance of Shriekers. I still think that's Night of the Shriekers and Shriek and Destroy. But here, it's a great start to a great monster. And this will lead me into pro number 11, is the special effects. Once again, are absolutely phenomenal. I'd almost say, in some ways, they're better than the first movie. Though we don't see the effects nearly as much as in the first film, I imagine that's because of the lower budget. But what we do have, so I feel like they just did a case where we can't show them nearly as much, but we'll funnel more money to make them look better, so it makes up for the fact that you don't see them all that much. Now, it's not like they're blue ballsing you, but you do see a good chunk of special effects in this movie, and they're all absolutely stellar, except for one thing, which I will get to momentarily. But the practical effects in this movie are absolutely stellar. The little graboid effects that we do see, the animatronic graboids, look fantastic. Unlike in the first Tremors movie, where you can a couple times see where the animatronic ends, like the scene where the sick graboid had beached itself during the day when Earl and Grady crashed their car. Well, I know where it ends. It's not obvious where the animatronic ends. And of course, the first opening shot where the graboid has that one Mexican dude in his mouth and goes back underground and swallows him whole looks fantastic. And it's a great intro to the monster, where it literally just explodes out of the ground, swallows the dude, and then disappears. You're like, oh, okay. And all the explosions in the movie look really, really good too. All the various big booms of the graboids blowing up on the ground look fantastic. The final explosion with the entire refinery being blown up looks fucking spectacular. Kind of reminds me of the exploding house from Phantasm 2 a little bit.
Yeah.
The Shrieker that literally gets blown to pieces with one shot from that big ass rifle is so awesome. I feel like that was a stuffed puppet that they just blew up. Wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Huh?
You smoked his ass.
Doing what I can with what I got. And I actually remember I watched this on TV with my mom and a friend of hers, and she hadn't seen that scene before. When that happened, she started busting out laughing. Not because she was like making fun of the effects, but because she was so surprised that the thing had just blown the fuck up the way that it did. It's just like splat, like popping a giant zit. Let's see. And overall, the animatronic Shriekers all look fantastic. They're very well detailed. They look like living, breathing creatures. They move very smoothly. They move very convincingly. Again, it's disappointing we never see them walk. That's where the CG comes in, which once again feel like that was just a limitation of the effects. But I'll talk about the CG in a little bit. But the animatronic and practical effects look utterly stellar. And yeah, this movie had a much lower budget than the first movie, but they used their money well, and I still feel like they just know how to spread a buck. So, do you have any cons with Tremors 2?
Well, first, before I get into that, I would like to add a knife to my pros, and it was the setting and the environment, which I think you explained very well. I did like that as well. So, one thing that I think would be a con that I've started to think about, and actually, whenever Nick was getting into the classification discussion, it actually kind of cemented my thoughts on it. The other one is a nitpick, and that nitpick is that the graboids have a lack of menace. That's also because they aren't particularly focused on. That was, for one thing, because the Shriekers were going to be introduced, but also the budget reduction had to do with why there wasn't so much graboid action. They had one full-sized animatronic or prop that they refurbished and used. You see it twice in the movie whenever it attacks the oil worker at the beginning, and then again whenever it's that one that's crawling out and about to morph. This also is one reason why the tentacles weren't really used. You see them hanging out of the mouth of the one graboid that's about to morph, but and also they're holding on. That's a cool shot at the beginning whenever they're kind of holding on to the oil worker in the mouth of the graboid.
Yep.
But yeah, the tentacles were kind of unfortunately a sacrifice for the budget, but they made a return in 3 and 4, thankfully.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's the nitpick. But what I would probably consider a con, and really I don't let it bother me too much. It's just one of those hindsight things that you realize. The origins. Used to, I found it very fascinating that there was something else besides dinosaurs that was prehistoric. And that's still a neat concept, and it should be explored more with the different eras of prehistoric Earth. But the problem is with the Precambrian era is that basically what was going on at that time on the planet, everything looked like Mustafar in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, pretty much. The Earth was basically being formed at that time. So it would be an interesting concept to explore life forms that evolved to exist in that environment. But at the same time, based on the way the graboids, the Shriekers, and the Ass Blasters operate, unless there's some other life forms that we don't know about, which would be an interesting thing to explore, in a Precambrian era, really what they would have been doing would have been eating each other. They would have had to have been cannibals, if you think about it.
Yeah, because
And
there was no life forms on land for the graboids or shriekers or ass blasters to eat. Everything else
indeed,
was below the surface of the ocean. Well, maybe that's what they mean. Like the graboids were originally ocean-dwelling monsters that eventually just evolved to be on land. So maybe that could explain their origins. But if they were to stick to their purely subterranean, underground origins, wouldn't really make sense for them to be that way because they wouldn't be able to survive unless they were cannibals.
indeed. So, given that, I started thinking, and whenever you were mentioning all these different considerations for classification, well, and I'll go ahead and say what the hole in this alternate theory is. Basically, this would retcon Tremors 4, seeing as how that takes place about 100 years before the first movie, and it would also change up things that are said later in Tremors 3 and Tremors the series. Well, not really Tremors the series, but I believe A Cold Day in Hell is whenever they really bring back up the Precambrian stuff. But what probably would have been a better option and what would have been cool to reveal in Tremors the series, maybe Nick knows where I'm going with this, is that the graboids were actually a biological weapon that was designed using Mixmaster. And
yes, but like you just said, that would retcon Tremors 4.
exactly. So really, this is just a what if in an alternate universe where, let's say, they only did Tremors the series and they didn't actually do The Legend Begins for Tremors 4. Let's say maybe Bloodlines is what would be Tremors 4. That, again, a lot of alternate, if this happened, this would happen kind of things. But it occurred to me that
they do retcon Tremors 2, and they kind of pull a Gamera versus Gauss, and the graboids actually are alien life forms, but they're so old that they're just part of the fossil record.
that's true, and that's also something that I considered whenever I was trying to do a Starship Troopers Tremors crossover. I was suggesting that the graboids were ancestors of the arachnids that arrived on Earth and just lay dormant. But I didn't get very far with that. That's why I ended up doing a Jurassic Park crossover. But anyways, yeah, I think that's an interesting alternate idea, the fact that they're biological weapons, because in the first movie, they lay out all the tropes of monster movies, really. They're either mutations caused by radiation from outer space or a biological weapon or prehistoric. They didn't, well, Rhonda did mention something like that, but then she dismissed it until they pursued it with this one. So, yeah, I guess this actually wouldn't be a con unless I let it be. It's a nitpick. So, yeah, those two things, the graboids, they feel like there's not as much menace as the original. And the origins kind of bring some things into question if you think about it too much.
Yeah. I similarly have a couple problems with this movie. I labeled them as nitpicks. Let's see. 2 or 3 of them are kind of like really petty nitpicks, and 2 of them are like kind of legit problems with the film. One of them being is the lack of graboid menace and screen time. Having only one graboid prop, as Trev just revealed to me. Again, it's understandable, and I never really noticed because I just imagine the graboids are very similar in appearance. The only difference is, slight color differentiation or like slight like different shape and how they're formed, but I just imagine they all look very, very similar. Excuse me. But yeah, the graboids, they don't have a lot of screen time, and they just don't feel like they're that threatening. Though it never really bugged me nearly as much because I just feel like the dread and feel and sense of threat that you have in the first Tremors, especially if you're marathoning these movies, just kind of carries over into Tremors 2. So you just remember all those feelings that you have, and they kind of still stick with you in Tremors 2. But by itself, yeah, the graboids don't really have a whole lot to them in this movie. It's understandable though, because A, as Trev said, they were going to introduce the Shriekers and they became the focus, and also B, because of limitation of budget and effects. But yeah, it is a slight problem that the graboids don't have a whole lot to do, but the graboid action that we do see in this movie is still fun to watch. Especially listening to those horrifying howling sounds that we have to listen to. It really gets under your skin. The kind of con pick, as I'll call it, is the CGI. Now, like I said, it gets a slight pass because it was 1996 and CG was still in its infancy, and also this didn't have the budget of Jurassic Park. But yeah, the CG is not that great. Once again, I feel like the filmmakers were conscious of that the CG wasn't up to date, or like it wasn't that great, so they tried to use it as sparingly as they could, unlike Hollywood now, which uses it to a crutch. But there's a couple shots where the CG doesn't look terrible, like the one far off shot where the characters are using the doors to hide themselves. It's obvious that the Shriekers are CG, but because it's far off, they kind of just blend in with the background. So you just kind of use a little stretch of the imagination and ignore the fact that they're CG. And also, one CG shot that I thought looked pretty decent was when the graboids, right before, or not the graboids, when the Shriekers were just like walking behind the storage shed, and then they just stopped and started milling around. That shot looked all right. And also that group of Shriekers that started running towards that hot, steaming pair of overalls, that looked all right. But a lot of the other CG effects, they look so dated. Especially when the Shrieker snaps at the other one after having its tongue cut off. Yeah, the big bulbous sacs on the side of the Shrieker's mouth just kind of dissolve and stretch out as it opens its jaws. And it looks like this is such a cliche, overused statement when it comes to bad CG effects. But yeah, they look like video game graphics. And I hate to say that phrase because it's so overused, but here it's true.
Yeah, there's only one shot that bothers me, and I described it, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Overall, well, again, it's a bit of a pass because you have to keep in mind this was 1996 and CG was still in its infancy. And also, this was a direct-to-video movie with a $4 million budget. So it does get some leeway, but still, there are a few shots where the CG does look bad. And it's not really until Tremors 5 when the CG really improves. But we'll talk about that when we get to Tremors 3. And the other three petty nitpicks I have is 3, the lack of gun action. They have plenty of firearms to fight the Shriekers with, but they just discard them at the worst possible time. Like they didn't even really, huh?
Probably another budget thing.
Possibly, yes, but still, it kind of drives me nuts that if they didn't want to use the double rifles, fine. But Earl kept one of his M16s inside the freaking core building where Kate was when Julio was killed. Like he pulls one out and he cocks it to shoot when Bert is driving up in his truck. Did they just kind of forget that they had that thing? That was always a really like especially as a kid because I was such a big gun nut. That would always really bug me. Like, did they just forget they have guns?
Yeah. Well, Bert ended up completely out of ammo.
That was another thing that drove me nuts too. Like, why are you taking away their ability to fight these monsters? Like, why? I kind of feel like that's a little cheap. But then again,
well,
it kind of was.
Yeah, it was. In that particular moment, well, it's probably actually one of the most memorable in the fan base, at least, moments is whenever Bert says,
I am completely out of ammo.
It's never happened to me
before. He talks about it like, I've never had erectile dysfunction before.
That's pretty much what it was for
him. Maybe that's no, I'm not gonna, nah. Maybe that's what led to Bert and Heather's separation.
Now there's an idea for a show.
Anyway, so yeah, the lack of gunplay bugs me a little bit, but that's kind of petty. Again, that's just like then it's always stuck with me. There's a lack of guns in this movie, just drives me nuts. Tremors 3 does it a little bit too, but not nearly as much as part 2. Nitpick number 4 is this movie has a little bit too low of a body count. They state 6 people got killed off screen by the graboids, which that's all well and good, but well, not in real life, but in the context of film, that's at least something. But that's still off-screen deaths, which I think are the worst kind of kills in, especially a monster movie. But really, the only 2 people that get killed is Pedro and Julio. That's it.
Yep, they're the chosen cannon fodder.
Yep, and it's just a little bit irritating for me personally because I want to see a little more Shrieker kills, but there's Tremors the series.
Yes.
And the last one that I have is the third act kind of does lose a little bit of steam. Like you had a really good first act, and then of course the whole second act is the montage and all the night scenes. But then once that's over, more specifically once they get on top of the oil towers, I feel the movie just kind of loses steam a little bit. And then at the very like the last 15, 20 minutes, they put some juice back into the truck and then they get it going and then they get to where they were going. But I do feel like the third act slows down quite a bit. That did lead to some good development for Kate and Earl, so that was good. But still, for me personally, I just never loved the third act as much as the first 2 acts. Still love this movie overall, but I still feel like it loses a little bit of steam.
I hear you. It's worse for me in Tremors 4. But that's actually not a third act problem. They actually do all that early on, surprisingly.
I think I know what you mean, but we'll get to that when we get to Tremors 4.
Yes.
So, anything else to add?
No, this is a damn good movie. Even if I came up with some nitpicks, they don't really bother the experience for me, really, at all. It's just things that would make it better, in my opinion.
Yes.
And it's still one of the best direct-to-video sequels ever made, in my opinion, and still second best.
Yep, same for me too. I wholeheartedly agree with Trev. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of my favorite sequels. My second favorite of the whole Tremors series. Love the shit out of it. And despite the problems that I listed, I'm still going to give it a perfect solid 10 out of 10. Love the crap out of it. Enjoy the shit out of it. That's all, folks.
I'm either a 10 or if I let the nitpicks bother me, a 9, but that's still the best rating you could give for a movie.
Yes. Alrighty. So Trev, got anything to plug?
I do indeed. Probably right after this video is done, or not long after, my second video is going to be uploaded on my channel, Trevor Fictosphere or Trevor Thomson. Again, if you type in Trevor Fictosphere, you'll probably find it. But because we're in a Tremors mood, or I'm in a Tremors mood because of our videos recently, I'm going through my collection for Tremors, which includes VHS, DVD, and most recently Blu-rays. So yeah, that will probably pop up right after this video or not long after. And of course, always visit or give Fictosphere a view, because I have stuff over there you might like. Not about Tremors yet, but someday.
Alrighty, and look forward to next week as Trev and I tackle the rest of the Tremors franchise. Of course, starting with 2001's Tremors 3. Look forward to that. And as always, post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And as always, if you go out in the middle of nowhere and you hear a loud shrieking sound, hide. And I will see you guys in the next video, if it'll end.